Welcome everyone to a fun discussion I want to do today about the High Elves. And we all know that the High Elves are my absolute favorite army. And the High Elves have had a very rocky history since Total War Warhammer 2 came out. When Total War Warhammer 2's first inception, there were a lot of people that would say the High Elves were very overpowered or they're very underpowered. And what it's really kind of come down to is that the High Elves have a very high power curve, skill level, cap, ceiling, whatever you want to call it. And as a result, you have a race that kind of suffers, I think, in the most part, for the most part, when it comes to high-level competitive play or even from general campaign play. So today I want to talk about the 5 worst units in the High Elf roster. And this is going to be purely based off of anecdotal experience. You know, this is me playing the High Elves through competitive matches, through the campaign, and really what I've come to see as just really the units I use the least. Now, this is not to say that these units are completely useless. The one nice thing about the High Elves army is that they have a lot of very niche picks. Every single thing in the army has got a place, a specific role that it can fare against very specific matchups, even if not to the wider spread portions of all their matchups. So, without further ado, let's dive into these top 5 worst members of the High Elf Silver Host. But there's 5 things I want to just kind of talk about real quick that make up, a High Elf army. You're typically going to see an army that has a very high armor. You have the access to martial prowess, which increases your melee defense, as well as a little bit of your melee attack. This is above 50% health, of course. The whole entire army has really good leadership, and you have a lot of answers to a lot of different things. This is, again, what makes the High Elf army so diverse, and there's got so many different kind of kit approaches to different matchups. There's no one build that's like, this is the build that beats all builds. You have to be very army dependent with your build. So when people ask me like, hey, how do you build a High Elf army? Well, I don't know, what am I fighting? There's so many different ways to approach so many different matchups. Like the Silverhelms, for example, are terrible against certain races, like for instance the Dark Elves, but they're really good against races that can't really deal with the level of cavalry, like when you take a look at maybe even a large amount of them when you're fighting against Tomb Kings or when you're fighting against vampire counts. They have very specific roles, and a lot of that can be said for most armies, but for the most part, High Elves are very temperamental with their builds. Now on top of that, their last point here is they have a very high skill cap. Now, that doesn't seem like a very nice pro for the army, but at the same time, when you win a High Elf battle over and over and over, when you start to really get in the groove of playing quick matches or in campaign, and you really get a sense for how to build their armies, it's extremely rewarding. You have these very beautiful looking armies that are these whites, these reds, these blues, all sorts of diamonds and rubies encrusted everywhere, and a lot of magic being cast around. The High Elves are probably one of the most regal looking armies in the entirety of the Warhammer universe. And with that, when you get this grand triumph from them, or even a Pyrrhic victory, it feels that much more resplendent because you have this whole illustrious army behind you. So let's dive into our 5 worst members of the High Elf Silver Host. A number 5 slot belonging to the archers with light armor. Now, these guys, they're not much different than your normal archers. In fact, that they are no different at all for the exception of their melee defense and their armor. You're spending a whole 50 points more from 475 with your basic normal archers to 425 with the light armor variant for really not a huge gain. In tabletop, you could spend 1 point per unit to get access to light armor. Back in the day, that wasn't a lot of points, so it made a lot of sense. And I like that Creative Assembly has tried to give us the nod here by giving us the archers with light armor, but it just really doesn't fit in a game like Total War Warhammer. This isn't going to add a huge amount of survivability to them. Your archers, for the most part, are, if they're compromised in the backline, short of them being saved by another unit, they're dead. If you're fighting up against units such as the Vampire Counts or the Skaven that can summon, or even the Vampirates, the Vampire Coast, that can summon up units in the back line, archers with light armor, it seems like that would be a natural fit, but really it doesn't, because their combat stats are still going to be the same. Melee attack is going to stay at 16. Weapon strength is going to stay at 24. So they're really going to suffer in the long run from not being able to actually fight off anything that compromises them. Sure, they can live a little bit longer, but at the end of the day, it's not worth those points. Take, for example, if you were to take 3 units of archers versus 3 units of archers with light armor, and you put them into your army, that's 150 points that you're hedging a bet that they get involved in a fight and the armor keeps them through the fight. 150. That's not, it doesn't seem like a lot, but when it comes down to it, when you're in a quick match, 150 points can be the difference between taking a prince on a dragon or a prince with an item on a dragon, or not at all. So you have to really kind of look at this as, okay, if for 150 points, is it worth trying to save these archers longer? And really, it's not. When I take a look over here at our standard variation, you can see that the archers with light armor, they look beautiful. Look at these little cuirasses and everything. When you look over here at the normal ones, you're not getting a huge difference. The armor is 15 versus, of course, the 40 on these chaps, and the melee defense of 18 with the light armor variant versus the melee defense of 14. So you're getting 4 melee defense on this. In addition, you're going to get, what, 25 some odd armor? It just doesn't really compute very well. So this is why these guys are number 5 on the list. So the reason they're here is there are other things that are worse than them. That just these guys just don't really play much of a fit in the majority of the army. I never really see myself taking the archers with light armor. Now, this list will be numbered 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in my idea of the hierarchy of the quote-unquote units' usefulness or uselessness to the grander high elf army. So let's get over to our number 4 slot. Those of you living in any great metropolitan area definitely can see our number 4 slot as the dreaded Doom Pigeon, the great eagles of the high elf host. Now, these guys are a really great kind of early game monster, more or less, and they're really strong when you're playing in campaign. I feel like they've got that really good little niche. But honestly, I feel like they're the best option for them is if they're a mount for Alarielle. That's really the only case in which I can see a great eagle being useful. And in and of that case, you're not even taking them as a solo unit. They suffer poor armor at 30 armor. They've got they have a pretty small low health pool at 3,500 health. On top of that, they have poor melee defense of 30. To put that into perspective, a spearman has a melee defense of 38. A high elf spearman, that is. So really, you're not getting a great beast here. The only thing that they actually have worthwhile is their weapon strength. It's at 390, and 156 of that is AP. So that's great. But really, the thing here is that they don't offer enough utility. They only cause fear. They're decently fast, I guess, at 110. They're pretty quick here, right? So you can use them to kind of murk up lords and stuff like that. If you deal with anything that has air superiority, though, these guys are not going to help you wrestle that in control. They can't go toe-to-toe with pretty much any other monster of almost equal value. I mean, you look at stuff like Manticores, if you look at all the other dragons, for instance, Dragon, is going to rip these things to shreds. The Great Eagle just doesn't have a huge place in my heart. When I look at it, though, they're 800 points. What can I field for 800 points? Okay, I can field any one of the Reavers, Illyrian Reaver Archers or Illyrian Reaver Lancers. I can field a single White Lion unit. I can field probably enough points to get a second unit of Archers, because Archers are 475. You put 2 of these guys together, you know what, you're just shy of your second unit right there. So on top of it, you can get Lothern Sea Guard here. So 800 points in the High Elf army is huge. Like I was saying, the High Elves do suffer from one very important thing. They have roster bloat. And this has been a problem since from the tabletop. They have really good spearmen, which are great core troops. They have good silver helms, which are, again, really good core cavalry. They can really get the job done. Illyrian Reavers are some of the best fast cav in the game, arguably, in my opinion. Now, when you look at their elite infantry, though, they kind of overlap one another. You have these heavy armor anti-infantry AP units in the Swordmasters, but then you also have heavy armor anti-large AP units with the Phoenix Guard. So you have so much bloat here, and even if you look at White Lions, who have decently good armor, I think it's around 90, with good AP, you have a lot of overlap here. So you do have to really pick and choose when you're choosing your High Elf army, and I feel like the Great Eagle very rarely has a place in my or any of my builds, for that matter, that really allows them to shine. They really just kind of, every time I choose them, I'm like, oh, this is going to be kind of an edgy pick. It'll be very off meta. I've never really had a chance for them to shine. But let's move on over to our number 3 slot. Believe me when I say no one is pained more by my number 3 slot, the Shadow Warriors. These guys are near and dear to me. They're one of my favorite units in the lore. You have these renegade kind of guerrilla fighters from Nagarythe that are always harrying the shores and taking care of any would-be Wood Elf assassins or Wood Elf Dark Elf invaders. That's why I love these guys so much. They're so cool, but really they just don't hit home. At 850 points, they're amazing stalker units, right? They're basically Deepwood Scouts in the High Elf army. They've got better health, they've got a little bit more ammunition, and for the most part, they look way cooler. Now, again, that's total preference. What really the big thing is, though, they're not that much better than normal archers here. So I brought a normal unit of archers to show you guys. So we have, of course, our Shadow Warriors here on the right. You can see the little unit card. Now watch when I hover it over to the archers. You're not getting that much more for really what is 375 some odd points more. You've got stock on the Shadow Warriors, which is nice. Get a little bit less ammo on the Shadow Warriors, but that's okay because you get better fighting capabilities. Again, really great. Also, you get move while shooting, so that's a great little thing as well, and you get your nice area shot. Again, these things are all very good and very strong bonuses, and really what makes the Shadow Warriors above archers, right? But for the most part, when you're dealing with a high elf army, you have this ability to field so many units that have archery. You've got archers, you've got Lowland Sea Guard, you've got Tyrannok chariots, you've got Shadow Warriors, you have all sorts of things that can shoot Evil Lyrian Reaver, archers, so much damn crap. They're elves, for Christ's sake. And so when you're taking a look at that, again, you have another overlap problem. You have archers overlapping with the, I almost said Deepwood Scouts, with Shadow Warriors. Shadow Warriors have a very specific niche, and right now, you're going to see them a lot in the meta. The nice thing about Shadow Warriors is they shut down Vampire Coast very easily. I would argue that's probably their best pick right now, is being able to deploy in Vanguard and surround and fire whilst moving an entire Vampire Coast army. Vampire Coast doesn't have the speed to catch up to these guys. Even these guys in and of themselves, they have a 38 speed, and as a unit on foot, that's very fast. Spearmen, for example, have 36. Elves typically have a little bit faster speed because, well, they're elves. So these guys are going to be running circles around the Vampire Coast, just shooting three-pointers. Now, I know it is making them sound like these guys are not that bad, and they really, again, guys, the high elf units here are not terrible. You'd never, ever, never not use them, really. But the point is that the Shadow Warriors just don't get their values worth for what you can field contrary to them. The high elves do need a nice front line. And if you spend so many more points on Shadow Warriors over, say, archers, then you're sacrificing more units out of your front line. And as a result, you're going to lose your martial prowess on your front line quicker because you have more units taking more damage, and you have your Shadow Warriors out here dealing out bits of damage to what they can. Because remember, they don't have AP. Even if we take a look at their missile weapon strength, still only has 4 AP. So these things have a very specific niche. They don't have any kind of anti-infantry bonuses. They don't have any kind of magic damage. They don't have any kind of fire damage. So again, you're choosing a pretty high-cost unit that you're better spent on an elite unit, like, say, even the White Lions that are 800 points. You're saving 75 points on a unit that's going to help you better on the front line. Now, I do want to talk about the Regiment Renown, because the Regiment Renown is arguably, again, one of the cooler units in the damn High Elf roster. But at 1,200 points, they're just not worth it. I mean, you're getting, what, 12 more melee defense, better stock mechanics with Loic Shroud here. Take a look at that. Gives you a little bit more speed, gives you unstoppable, so they really can't discover you till they're right up close and personal. But on top of it, you're spending 1,200 points on these guys, so 350 points more than your standard Shadow Warrior. So you're already, what, over 725 points in the hole on something that has such a very niche use and not a lot of return on it. Because again, you're not getting poison damage with these guys, so they're still going to be able to get hunted down by any kind of fast cav. You're not going to get any kind of cool magic damage or fire damage, which allows you to take out Vampire Coast, Counts, and Tomb Kings a lot easier. Although, like I said, these are really good Vampire Coast matchups. And you don't have any AP, so you can't break into a heavy Chaos front line. These guys have always had one role in tabletop, and it was to shut down artillery. And they still do that quite well. And they look damn cool doing it. Like, look how awesome that guy looks. Woo! But again, guys, for 1,200 points in these, they're just too niche. Even the Shadow Warriors themselves are just far too niche as it is. So these unfortunately fall third on our list. So let's jump over to our number 2 slot. And in second place, the Flamesfire Phoenix. Now, in tabletop, I absolutely love these guys. I ran Frostheart Phoenixes in my army like mad. They were beautiful looking models. Even in this game, they look fantastic. They're so cool looking. Let's take a look at their stats out here, right? They've got great speed at a whopping 120, and they have really good melee attack at 42. In addition to that, you get magic and get flaming attack, so it's really nice for them. But really, they've got poor everything else. Got terrible melee defense. They got piss poor armor. I mean, even their weapon strength is not that awesome. Their charge bonus is a little low. When you stack them up against a Frostheart Phoenix, they just don't really get the job done. And that's really what I want to talk about. Is that the flamesfire Phoenix isn't terrible, it's that the Frostheart Phoenix is just that much better. You can use the flamesfire Phoenix in very specific matchups when you're dealing with flammable units such as the Tomb Kings and the such, because you get some really cool abilities. But really what it comes down to is that the Frostheart Phoenix you get way more utility out of for only 300 points more. The flamesfire Phoenix is 1350. So when you're thinking about that in a competitive arena, that is any number of their elite units being just completely like taken out point for point. You're looking at 1350 versus say like the 12700 of Phoenix Guard, or the 1100 of Swordmasters, or I believe it's 1200 of Dragon Princes. You get that elite tier, that tier 3 unit. The flamesfire Phoenix is going to be on it. So you're basically choosing that, the flamesfire Phoenix, over some of their elite infantry, which again, which we said, you have to have a really nice, good front line with high elves, or at least a front line that can hold, so that anything on the outskirts or any of your flying air force, it used to be called the High Elf Flying Carnival, can really deliver the pain to the enemy. And again, I just don't think that these guys can do it. Let's take a look at some of their other abilities here, right? So they do have Rebirth, which is nice, but it only has a 50-50 chance of triggering off, and it could either kill the unit outright or heal it entirely. When it does heal, it's amazing. There's this huge, awesome explosion as the flamesfire Phoenix kind of returns to full health, and it's really, really sick, but you're hedging your bet on this actually going through. In addition, you have Wake of Fire, which is a very strong ability. You can see it right there. The problem with it is it requires your micro to use properly. You have to really charge this thing down the entire length of an army, hoping you strike against more light armored units than you do heavy armored units. So if you're fighting against a Chosen front line, it's not going to do as much damage. If you're fighting against a Tomb King's front line, it's going to rip some shit up. So you really have to be mindful of Wake of Fire, because it does pull you away from microing the rest of your army, and it's not bound to an actual button. You have to left click this as many times as you can to get all 10 shots off, and that's not simply just spamming left click and 10 times and it happens. Nope, you have to click it, one will drop, it lands, then you can click it again, then you can click it again. It's got a very set activatable. As you can see right there, it's got a 10-second recycle. So, I'm sorry, 10-second cast on it. So you have to really use this thing properly to make sure that you can actually get the full use out of it. And if you don't, you've just negated a portion of what makes the flamesfire Phoenix so good. In tabletop, these things could just simply fly over a unit and do damage to it. I wish that was the case here. Unfortunately, it is not. Now, another thing, this is true to both Phoenixes, is attuned to magic. And the way that this works is, as long as you are above 15 winds of magic, you get 12% damage resistance. So this can kind of be seen as a dual-edged sword, and you really shouldn't look at it as a direct advantage in taking Phoenixes. If you have this, you have the ability to essentially get use of the winds of magic if your caster dies. Just think of it that way. You get basically an insurance. If your caster dies, you lose access to winds of magic, which shuts down a whole portion of the battlefield that you cannot access, quote unquote. So that's the nice thing about Phoenixes. Now, let's compare these bad boys. So the Frostheart Phoenix, look at this. Just way more health, way more armor, 50 more armor, more leadership, a little bit slower, a little bit less melee attack, but you get 18 more melee defense, you get 30 more weapon strength. A slightly lower charge bonus, unfortunately, though. But the nice thing here, though, is the Blizzard Aura. -9 to melee attack and minus 10% to AP. So these guys, they just take the cake for me. At 1650, they're way worth their points value. You can get them to goon in lords. They can pull in and out of combat very quickly because of their 100 speed. So I think these guys really win and take the cake over the flamesfire Phoenix. But guys, let's jump over to our number 1 slot, the single worst unit in the High Elf roster. You probably guessed it. You probably had a good idea of what was going to happen, what it was going to be. But here it is. The Tyrannok Chariot. And honestly, it's been like this for a long time. In tabletop, no one wielded the Tyrannok Chariot. Everyone went with the White Lion Chariot. The White Lion Chariot is always going to be the better chariot. They do have one thing going for them. They're like probably arguably the best ranged chariot in the game as far as the amount of missile damage they can do and the range that they've got. They really kind of outclass almost every other chariot. They also bring magic damage to the High Elf army. And if you think about where the High Elf army was at the inception of Total War Warhammer 2, This was the only ranged unit they had that did ranged, or I'm sorry, that did magic damage, not range damage. Did magic damage. The Sisters of Averlorn were not in the game yet, and as soon as they came into the game, you finally had magic, fire, and AP all from one unit. So they really were able to turn the tide for the majority of high elf kind of missile play. But these guys since then have really fallen out of favor from the greater high elf meta. I think the only people that I've really seen use these very properly was Gobbo King in some of his competitive matchups. But the ilmar chariot just fares a lot better as a whole, because it is, again, meant for melee, so it has stats that are a little bit more in line with everyone else. The high elves and the dark elves are supposed to be mirrors of one another, and the Cold One chariot outclasses the Tyrannok chariot by leaps and bounds, because it does AP damage and AP melee attacks on top of it being anti-infantry. It has a very, very substantial melee defense. But you take a look at this actual chariot, it has the worst charge bonus of any 3 entity, right here, right there, 3 entity size chariot. The only chariots that have worse are the Tomb Kings at 52 and the goblins at 30, and they have much higher entities per unit. So really, you have this god-awful melee unit, or chariot, which even ranged chariots in Total War Warhammer 2 and in Tabletop were supposed to be a little bit kind of melee-centric. That's why they've got anti-infantry as a weapon strength there, so that's something to consider here. They do have martial prowess, which will kick in once the game starts, which will increase their melee defense and melee attack slightly, but outside of that, as soon as they drop below 50% health, which is easy at 3,666 health, this melee defense will revert back to 22. And at 22 melee defense, it's the second worst melee defense in the game, behind Goblin Wolf Chariots at 20. So that's pretty dismal. I mean, yes, with the, I believe Martial Press is 12? Yes, 12 melee defense, it will bring it up to 34, which is quite good, but that's not that good because it's actually on par with almost every other chariot. So as soon as they drop that to 50% health, they do have that problem. You can make the argument, of course, that Dark Elf chariots will rampage off the battlefield. That is a very good point, but every other chariot, for the most part, really outclasses the Tyrannok chariot. There isn't a whole lot of utility you get with these guys, and they're so expensive for what they do at 850 points that, again, you're just wasting points on these. Take the Ilmar chariot at 1100 and get way better use out of an actual melee combatant chariot. These guys' charge bonus is so low, and their actual melee attack bonus is so low that you can strictly only use them in a hit and run range fashion. I mean, 124 missile damage is nothing to kind of scoff at, and on top of it being magic damage as well. They have quite a bit of ammunition, and they have quite a long range. That's really their only role. But you're spending so many points, again, in an army that is choked with its roster for point usage, that the Tyrannok chariot I have not fielded once in my entire time playing Total War Warhammer 2. And I don't even like chariots, so that's something to say. But I've never fielded them because they don't even play like normal chariots. It's just I've just never seen a direct use for them. Talking through people like Turn or Indy Pride, we all kind of came to the same consensus that the Tyrannok chariot was always like the first on this list to think of when thinking of, okay, what are the 5 worst units for high elf that you really just don't think of or use? I mean, we had talked about stuff like the White Lions, but the White Lions have really come up in favor with the most recent patches and the way the armies have kind of balanced out. But the Tyrannok chariot has never really had a chance to truly shine. It can fire whilst moving, which is great. It's got its anti-infantry. It's got its nice reaver bows, which are cool. It's a nice little nod directly from the tabletop. But again, the Tyrannok chariot remains a number 1 in my eyes as the absolute worst unit in the high elf roster. But like I said, guys, not all these units are absolutely useless. They do have very explicit niche kind of picks that make a lot of sense. Like we said, Shadow Warriors against Vampire Coast make a lot of sense. When you've got flamesfire Phoenixes, they really, really rock against things that are flammable or things that are really just going to get up close and personal with all the bombardment abilities. So please don't look at this list as a way to never choose these units, but rather look at this list as a way that you can choose these units in their fine-tuned kind of niche matchups and picks and what makes them actually shine. So hopefully you enjoyed this little video here today, and it gives you a better idea to play High Elves. I mean, High Elves are a very high skill cap army, and you really have to know how you're building each and every unit. Every point really matters with High Elves. With the Dark Elves, you have a lot of forgiveness with some of their units, either from the fact that they dole out so much AP, or when Murderous Prowess kicks in, it does a crap ton of damage. So you have a lot of forgiveness with them. And with the Wood Elves, you're playing a very range-centric army. The High Elves have always kind of suffered from this, jack of all trades, master of none. And I know the rest of that saying is like better master of none than the master of one. But still, my point is that the High Elves, they need a very fine-tuned build every time they bring anything to the battlefield. And hopefully this video will help give you an idea of what really kind of stands out and what kind of is weaker in that fine-tuned process. But guys, thanks so much for watching here today. If you like this video, let me know in the comment section below. I'm more than happy to do a 5 best units of the High Elves, so you have a good end of the spectrum to really kind of judge where what your builds are going to look like. But I'm more than happy to do more of these videos in the future here. But as always, guys, thanks so much for watching here today. Don't forget to check out my Patreon, check out me on Twitter, but more importantly, go on my Twitch, same name, Italian Spartacus. I will be streaming all my campaign plays on Twitch from now on, just because it's a lot better monetarily for me. And also, anytime you guys donate to me, 30% of it is not eaten up by YouTube like it is when I do super chats. I will continue to do Warpstone Cups always on YouTube. I want to always provide that to you guys as a YouTube solo platform, so that'll always be here for you. But go ahead and check me out on Twitch. Follow me there. You can see my campaign streams on Tuesdays and Thursdays around 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. But as always, guys, thanks so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.